can't live by bread alone. Yeah, this word got food in it. Stepping on the devil dome, you should see the bruise in it. Backing out the scripts, told a demon to stand down. Go against the Most High, we gon' see how it pan out. The Father gave me hope, fill me with the ghosts. Now they hate it when I glow. Joseph with the coat, looking for their fruit, but they ain't got no cantaloupe. The Messiah over Lio, you can't be a fan of both. Can't serve two masters. Bread of heaven with the living water, yeah, serving up a truth platter. We ain't idolizing no folly, now we setting up a new standard. When Christ touched down, make the whole earth shake like Bruce Banner. Yeah, bringing them troops to ya. End times getting spookier, warfare getting nuclear, mankind getting goofier. They intoxicated with a wine, damn, she done roofied them. I'm checking every word, spirit doctrine like a proofreader. I hate these Nicolatans, hate these raving idols, man, I hate these flipping pagans. Trying to play my father and I hate these imitations. Screaming out Hosanna, we escape that simulation. Better flee them evil deeds or else that lake is where you layin'. Great is he inside of me, casting out this net like I was by the Sea of Galilee. Harvest gon' be plenty, but the laborers are few. Matthew 17 and 20, there ain't nothing we can't do. I can't be no lukewarm, Fringes with the blue on. Devil wanna deal, but I told him this ain't Groupon. Praise to the Almighty, you know we gon' sing a new song. Hail the King of King, the Ultra Low, no Jimmy Neutron. If you keep his laws and his commands, then we can fellowship. I don't get with Pharisees and I don't rock with Hellenists. I ain't praising man, cause only Father get my reverence. I'm swimming in the word, it got me feeling like a yellowfin. Yeah, big stepper, Mr. Demon Chin Checker, trying to hear that well done, cause I feel that displeasure. Father pouring out the wrath, and he got a big measure. If it ain't about the kingdom, then I don't give a six letter. You got faith in the Messiah, you got power. I was clean up in that blood just like a shower. Isaiah 5, you were the vine that came on sour, but now we stand and giving glory in this hour. Yeah, we breaking them curses, fleeing the ways of the serpent. Follow his word and pray for discernment, cause they want us laying in hearses. We gotta rise up, raise and resurface, choose life and stay in your purpose. The price was paid like a merchant, through Christ who came as a servant. See, the kingdom is really the bag, but yet somehow they chasing a Birkin. After this you ain't getting a chance, while you living you can't but search him. Gotta call on his name like his urchin, never knowing that day is emerging. So repent at the weight of perversions, judgment coming, that thing is for certain. Let's go.
Shalawam family, it's your brother Yasharahla from the House of Bread, and I have to give all praises, all glory, and all honor to the Most High God, whose name is YAHAWAH. Of course, I do so in the name of his only begotten Son, Hamashiach, Yahawashi, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. Make sure you make your way over to HIBofficialZion.com and get you a copy of the HIB, the Hebrew Israelite Bible. Shalawam, Kwam Yasharahla.
The Hebrew Israelite Bible is the first of its kind, restoring the names of persons, places, and things in the ancient Hebrew dialect, colloquially referred to amongst the Israelite community as the Lashawan Quadash. Most importantly, it preserves the Most High's name YAHAWAH in the Paleo-Hebrew script. The Hebrew Israelite Bible comes complete with all 80 books found in the 1611 King James Version Bible, including the Apocrypha.
All right, Shalawam family. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, all glory, and all honor to the Most High God, whose name is YAHAWAH. Of course, I do so in the name of his only begotten Son, Hamashiach, Yahawashi, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. It's your brother Yasharahla. And today we are diving into a very interesting and important biblical topic. All right. Who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus? All right. Make sure, family, you guys hit that like button when you come in. Make sure you share the video. Do your part in helping spread this word, spread this truth. Additionally, make sure that you're following the camp, House of Bread, as well as myself on all social media platforms. Links are in the description box of every video. All right. So before we dive into the topic, actually, I just wanted to, of course, plug the fact that next week we will be continuing on this with this topic, right? With this theme of the Exodus, and I think it's apropos given what's going on in the world prophetically. Lord willing, we are the generation that sees the deliverance of the nation of Israel the same way that the Most High God delivered the children of Israel from the land of ancient Egypt, right? We are here in America, Babylon the Great, but also spiritually Sodom and Egypt, right? We're in the new Egypt. When we look at the book of Second Ezra, the Most High says that he's not going to suffer to allow his people to dwell in Egypt anymore, and that he's going to destroy it, right? So Lord willing, we're on the precipice of that happening, right? So it's important that brothers and sisters, watch, pray, pay attention to biblical prophecy, pay attention to the to current events, and of course, bring the two together, right? We have to measure the time diligently and be very vigilant, especially here in these last times, right? These last days. So next week we will be diving into who Moses potentially is in the Egyptian record, right? Fire graphics right here, right? Moses had a life as Pharaoh's son, right? Growing up as royalty, he had the lap of luxury, right? But we know how the scriptures tell us that he did not want to suffer to see his people suffer at the hands of the Egyptians, and he did what was right, right? He didn't stand against the blood of his neighbor, right? So we'll be diving into who Moses potentially is in the Egyptian record, right? So make sure you tune in next week. Again, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you hit that bell icon so that you get notified whenever we go live or drop any videos, okay? Where were we? What do I want to do first, right? So actually, I went on Facebook the other day as I was wrapping up this presentation, and I made a post, and the post says, who do you think the Pharaoh of the Exodus is, right? Who do you think was the Pharaoh of the Exodus? And actually, let me pull it up real quick on Facebook. Give me 1 second, family. Let's get into it. Of course, it'll make me log into everything, right? So I'm going to pull up the post here for your family, and I just want to take a look at a couple of the comments. Continue. All right. So, like I said, early this week, early this week, I took to Facebook and asked, who do people think the Pharaoh of the Exodus is, right? So this was, last Friday, actually. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Right, actually, let's remove that. Right. So I asked, right, who do you think the Pharaoh of the Exodus is? So let's take a look. Nope. Let's take a look at the comments, right? All right, so this person was super bugged out. He said non-human, right? Shout out to the good brother Panay from Ramgadal. He said Thutmose III, when Moses was a child, and Queen Hatshepsut, I believe, my opinion, right? This brother said Ramses II, his reign fits the late dating of the Exodus, though some debate it was on. The elder Mabatak says Ramses II. Good brother, former Sakari brother, Sagariyad from Chicago. Zealous of Jeshurun, he says Sentanke, ? Right now, as a member of Sakari, right, our former leader, he put out a presentation some years ago, and he went to the limbs of saying that Sentanke was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, right? Now, the Sentanke is a Pharaoh of the 20th dynasty of Egypt, right? And in that presentation, he made the claim that Moses was an individual by the name of Amen-Misi, right? Now, the issue with that, and the issue with that whole entire breakdown was he went to various different places. He went to the Book of Revelation. He went to Yahawashi's words in the Gospels, where he said that the from the law to John the Baptist, people were prophesying, right? The prophecies were from Moses to John the Baptist, right? He did some weird shit with the Book of Revelation to try to date back from the time of John the Baptist to when he's now claiming the Exodus to happen, and then that pointed him to the 20th dynasty of Egypt and Sentanke. Now, Sentanke, some sources say that he was known as the Pharaoh of the boat, right? So that was another thing that he used to say that, yes, Sentanke is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Again, what we're going to find and see in this presentation is that the Exodus did not happen within the 20th dynasty. The children of Israel were well within the land of Israel, right? Conquered the land of Canaan by the time the 20th dynasty comes around. So Sentanke is 1000% not the Pharaoh of the Exodus, right? Another brother, again, Ramses. When people say Ramses, they think about Ramses II, which is Ramses the Great. This brother says the one who had the wide hips. He's talking about Akhenaten, aka Amenhotep IV, right? So Akhenaten, he is the husband of Queen Nefertiti. He was famous and infamous, right? Especially in Egypt, for changing essentially the state religion, so to speak, right? He focused worship on a god named Aten, right? Hence his name Akhenaten. He changed his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten, right? Someone says the Pharaoh of the Exodus was a Hyksos Canaanite king. I have no clue what this person is talking about, right? Someone says Amenhotep II. Someone said I thought it was Amenhotep. Someone says Seti. They put Seti with two eyes. So I'm not sure if they're saying Seti the first or Seti the second. Someone says Merneptah, right? So we're going to take a look again through the presentation to find out and pinpoint who the Pharaoh of the Exodus is, right? Some of the people in the comments got it right, okay? So with that said, let's go ahead and just dive into the presentation, right? Again, make sure you guys hit that like button, right? Share the video. And when this live is over, make sure you make your come back to this video and you hype the video, right? That's what you can do to help push these videos in the algorithm so we can help spread the truth. A lot of people, when it comes to stuff like this, a lot of people need proof that the biblical narrative is true, right? And the issue is within academia, right? Scholars oftentimes utilize the Bible to prove certain things, but then based off of their understanding of other historical events, they'll then go and say that the Bible is not true, or they'll say, oh, well, this was just legend and this was just mythos and whatnot, right? There's a lot. I watched a a documentary, and this is when I first came into the truth back in 2018. It's a documentary by a gentleman by the name of I think his name is Tim Mahoney, and he has a series, right? He has two parts, right? He has part one and part two of something called Patterns of Evidence, and then he has a couple of other documentaries surrounding the Bible, right? And I can remember vividly in Patterns of Evidence part one, I believe the guy's name is something Finkelstein, right? He's an archaeologist from Israel. He's Jewish, right? And this Jewish man went on record and said that the Exodus, he doesn't believe the Exodus was a historical event. That just is really hilarious. That Amalek would say that the Exodus was not a historical event, right? And again, in this presentation, we're going to examine the evidence that a lot of scholars just completely brush over, right? Again, a lot of times they'll utilize one source to try to prove something else, and then they'll say that that source is not valid for whatever reason for something else, right? It's the hypocrisy within academia is rampant, right? But anyway, let's dive into the presentation, right? So the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Now, when it comes to the Exodus, most scholars place this pivotal biblical event to the Egyptians' 19th dynasty, right? Egypt's 19th dynasty, which Ramses II is the greatest pharaoh within the 19th dynasty, right? Ramses II, or also known as Ramses the Great, he's the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty and has been believed to be the Exodus pharaoh by many scholars and has been portrayed as such in mainstream Hollywood, right? Put a 1 in the chat if you've ever seen The Prince of Egypt, right? If you've ever seen the Prince of Egypt movie, put a 1 in the chat if you've ever seen it, right? Classic, right? What I will say, what I love what DreamWorks did is that they made it relatively historically accurate in terms of phenotype, right? At least they made the Israelites and the Egyptians not white people, right? Like the Ten Commandments, with Charlton Heston playing Moses, right? So again, throughout mainstream Hollywood, Ramses II has been portrayed as the Pharaoh of the Exodus, the Pharaoh who God hardened his heart, right? So this is because Exodus 1 and 11 anachronistically states that the Israelites built Pharaoh's store cities named Pithom and Ramses. Let me grab my sword real quick, right? So let's just read the book of Exodus, chapter 1 and verse 11. It reads, it says, actually, I'll start at verse 7 for a little context, right? So it says, and the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them out of the land. Therefore, they did set taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses, right? So I use this term anachronistically, right? What is an anachronism, you may ask, right? An anachronism is when one uses a name for a place outside of its time, right? We see one of the roots of this word chronology, right? Order, right? Time. So for instance, I'm from New York City. If I was writing a paper, all right, about the Algonquin, right? Or whatever, I believe it was the Algonquin that were, or the Iroquois in New York City, right? If I was writing about New York City, what is known as New York City today, during, let's say, the 1400s, right? That would be an anachronism because they didn't call it New York City then, right? Even if I was talking about the 1500s, right? It was called New Amsterdam at the time, right? If I'm writing about events back in that time frame, but I use a common term now for my audience. I'm using what's known as an anachronism because, again, the average human being doesn't know what New Amsterdam is, right? Another example would be, here in Philadelphia, we have something called the Schuylkill River. I'm not sure what the Schuylkill River was called before the colonizers came, right? But the Lenape, right, they lived in this area, right? So if I'm using a term that refers to this location in Philadelphia, if I use the term Philadelphia to describe historical events that happened when the Lenape were ruling and wandering and having societies within this area, that would be an example of an anachronism, right? So, and just for the record, right, what Ramses is archaeologically is known as a site called Avaris, right? Avaris was the capital of the Hyksos dynasty, right? The Hyksos was the 15th dynasty of ancient Egypt during what's known as the Second Intermediate Period, right? However, right, there are several problems with placing the Exodus within the 19th dynasty, right? So we have this pharaoh named Merneptah, right? He erects something called the Merneptah Stele, right? Again, he's the 14th. He's not the 14th. He's the fourth pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. He is the successor of Ramses the Great, who most scholars say is the pharaoh of the Exodus. This stele was erected during his 5th year of his reign to commemorate Egyptian military victories over Libyans in the Levant. Contains one of the oldest mentions of the name Israel, right? So it names Israel, right? It has a cartouche, right? A nameplate, right? And Israel is found within it. And it's in the context of the land of Canaan. According to the biblical narrative, the children of Israel were in Egypt. They made their exodus. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And then, of course, they went into the land of Canaan and started conquering it, right? So problems with the timeline if we're going to place Ramses II as the pharaoh of the Exodus. So again, here is from the Merneptah Stele. Israel is laid waste. His seed is no more. Okay, that's the propaganda of Merneptah, right? What you got to understand with all rulers, right? There's a level of propaganda that happens, right? The Egyptians were great at it. Look at the Assyrians, right? Sennacherib, Ashurbanipal, all these different kings, right? Cyrus, Artaxerxes, all of these kings in ancient societies, they had a lot of propaganda, and the Egyptians were the kings of propaganda, kind of like today in America, right? Modern day America, right? Who's the leader of America? Who's the king in America, in Babylon? It's Donald Trump, and this guy is the king of narcissism and propaganda. This is the same thing that's going on with these pharaohs. These pharaohs literally believed that they were walking, living gods, and many of them were worshipped as gods as they lived, right? So the Merneptah Stele, again, demonstrates that Israel is an established nation by the time this stele was believed to be erected. Ramses II reigned for 66 years, from roughly 1279 to 1233 BCE. His predecessor, Seti I, only reigned for 11 years. Now, when we read Acts, the 7th chapter, right, Acts 7 and 30, let me grab it real quick. The book of Acts, chapter 7, and I will start at 29. It says, then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush, right? So Moses, again, he is an adopted Hebrew boy, right? He's adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. He's raised in Pharaoh's house. He gets all these different titles and this glory. And of course, there's a time when he slays an Egyptian, right? And Pharaoh wants to kill him. And he goes and flees in the land of Midian. He ends up linking up with Jethro, right? He marries Zipporah. He has 2 sons, okay? Again, he was gone for 40 years. So that's important. So given the biblical account, Moses fled Egypt for 40 years and returned to a new Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Okay? When you just read the narrative. Manasseh reigned for only 10 years. He could not be the successor of the Exodus Pharaoh because the timeline simply does not make sense nor add up. Israel was an established people in the land of Canaan by the 5th year of his reign. His father and predecessor, Ramses II, cannot be the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Manasseh could not be the successor of the Exodus Pharaoh because the timeline simply does not make sense nor add up. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years before entering the promised land. Israel was an established people in the promised land by his 5th year of his reign, right? So is there any evidence of Israel in Egypt? Let's look at Avaris, right? And the excavations of Tel el-Daba, right? So when we look at things in the Bible, right? Places. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Gath, right? The city of Gath today is known as Tel el-Safi, right? When we look at a place like Avaris, which anachronistically is called Ramses in the Bible, the place is called Tel el-Daba, right? So Avaris or Tel el-Daba served as the capital during the Hyksos period. Now, Hyksos means shepherd king, right? Josephus writes about it. He quotes someone, an Egyptian historian by the name of Manetho. We'll touch on Manetho later on in the presentation, right? Now, some people, and I'm not sure where I actually lean per se. Some people will say that the Israelites were indeed the Hyksos, right? And when I was a member of Sakari, our former leader, he taught that the Israelites under Joseph would have came up into power under the rulership of the Hyksos, right? When you read Josephus's works, he seems to associate the Hyksos with us. So some people believe that the Hyksos, that dynasty, right, known as the 15th dynasty, were actual Israelites. Interesting enough, the first king of the Hyksos, he's named Salatis by Manetho. Now, interesting enough, Salatis, again, this is a Greek rendering. Now, when you read in the book of Exodus, Joseph is said to be governor of the land. And that term for governor is shalat. Salatis. There's a case that could be made that the Israelites were indeed the Hyksos, right? I've heard people even say that when you look at the second ruler of the Hyksos, his name was Beon, right? Now, who could that potentially be? I've heard that some people say that that's Benjamin, right? Benjamin's name, Banyamyan, right? That's what Jacob named him after Rachel died. Rachel named him Benoni or Bonawaniah, right? Which means son of my affliction. So there's a case that could be made that, again, Benjamin was the second ruler of the Hyksos, which would mean that the Hyksos are the Israelites, right? Again, I'm not too sure. I haven't said one way or another which way I lean, right? But again, regardless, right, it's important to understand that the Hyksos capital was Avaris in the land of Goshen, right? It was strategically located in the biblical land of Goshen, precisely where the book of Genesis states the Israelites settled and multiplied. Excavations of a Semitic palace revealed a garden with 12 main tombs, reflecting the 12 sons of Jacob. The grandest, a pyramid tomb, was found completely empty. The missing bones perfectly aligned with Exodus 13 and 19, where Moses took Joseph's bones out of Egypt, right? Now, usually what happens with robbers, right? And this is why this evidence is so important, right? To look at. When we look at like King Tut's tomb, or let's say Ramses the Great tomb, you have tomb raiders, right? People will rob the graves because the Egyptians, they buried a bunch of wealth with them, right? So they can take it to the afterlife. The bones are still there typically, right? You can still find mummies, right? There's mummies from Egyptian tombs in museums all around the world. But with the Society at Avaris, right, which is the Ramses that you read about in the Bible, the bones are missing, right? So this lines up perfectly with the biblical narrative. Inside the empty pyramid tomb, archaeologists found an intentionally smashed remains of a colossal 1.5 life-size statue of a high-ranking official. This obviously it's in the pyramid, right? The one of the 12, right? The statue featured a distinct ruddy mushroom-style haircut, characteristic of Levantine foreigners. Remarkably, the back of the statue retained paint, revealing a vibrant, multicolored striped robe, strongly linking the figure to the biblical Joseph. Again, Joseph was given what? He was given a coat of many colors by his father Jacob. So again, more evidence for the Israelites in the land of Egypt, in Goshen specifically, right? So this is an archaeological sketch of what this would have been, okay? This is actually from an archaeological report by an individual by the name of Manfred Betek. It's called Avaris, capital of the Hyksos, recent excavations at Tel el-Daba, right? So now, the Hyksos, again, the 15th dynasty, ruled Lower Egypt, Goshen, which is the northern part of Egypt. Why is Lower Egypt the northern part of Egypt? Because the Nile flows north. It's the only river in the world that flows north, right? So Upper Egypt is south. Lower Egypt or Goshen is north, okay? It says, so the Hyksos, they exacted tribute from the Theban 17th dynasty during what's called the Second Intermediate Period, right? So Thebes is a city a little further south, right? And you have Memphis closer to Goshen area, right? You had the 17th dynasty ruling down in Thebes. Kamos I, who's the last pharaoh of the 17th dynasty, led campaigns against the foreign Hyksos rulers and died in battle. His brother, Amos I, founder of the 18th dynasty, successfully defeated the Hyksos and captured Avaris. Now, again, looking back at the biblical narrative, whether you take that the Hyksos were the Israelites, right, starting with Joseph ruling, because again, he was the governor of the land. It was a famine. So the Second Intermediate Period is a time of chaos and disorder, right? There's no unified Egypt, and you have these foreign rulers, right, who are exacting tribute from the actual people of the land, the so-called indigenous people of that land, right? So when you look at it from that lens, it makes sense that Amos the First would have more than likely been the Pharaoh that we read about in Exodus 1 that said, hey, let us deal wisely with them. Because if you understand the geography of Goshen, it's connected to the Levant, right? You have something known as the Way of the Philistines, right? So you have Philistines that were dwelling along the coast, right? And then you had these different Canaanite cities, right? So you had Canaanites, you had Philistines, and you had these Hyksos rulers who are being described as Semitic, living in Goshen. So let's say again, the Hyksos are Israelites. Amos conquers them, defeats Avaris, and now the logical thing to do is to what? Enslave them. Again, lining up with the biblical narrative. So we will revisit Avaris later. Let's look at the biblical timeline, right? We got to establish a precise date for the Exodus. Now, in order to do so, we have to establish one thing first, okay? How do we know BC dates, right? Because today, right, we live in AD or CE, Common Era, right? These dates are BC, before Christ, or before the Common Era. So how do we know when certain events that happened in the ancient world are pinpointed to based on a Gregorian / Julian / Roman AD BC dating? How do we know when those dates are? So there's something known as the Assyrian eponym list, right? So the Assyrians used the Limu or eponym system, right? Naming each calendar year after a high-ranking official. Scribes kept continuous, unbroken, uniform lists of these names year after year, creating a highly detailed relative timeline of ancient Near East. While incredibly accurate, this timeline was floating, so to speak. Scholars needed a verifiable astronomical event to anchor these lists to our modern BC dates, right? And this is K51 in the British Museum of one of these or eponym lists. So within these eponym lists, right, this is from the Assyrian eponym canon by George Smith, page 63, right? There's something known as the Bur-Sagal eclipse. The breakthrough came from an entry in the Assyrian list stating that in the month of Sivan, during the eponym of Bur-Sagal, there was a total eclipse of the sun. Using precise astronomical calculations, astronomers pinpointed the exact celestial event to June 15th, 763 BCE. This single eclipse served as a Rosetta Stone of sorts for chronology, instantly transforming centuries of relative Assyrian dates into absolute fixed BC dates, right? And again, based off of that, right, they were able to, of course, line up the biblical narrative, right? So when you read in the Bible, we have Assyrian kings like Sennacherib, Ashurbanipal, Tiglath-Pileser, right? Them coming against the children of Israel and the children of Judah at various different times, and that's how they were able to anchor, right? Again, that was the anchor point, and they were able to attach these biblical dates, right, based off of them finding this astronomical event, right? This total eclipse. So, what does the Bible say? 1 Kings 6:1. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. Right? So, again, we know how we can anchor BC dates and align them with biblical events. Because the now fixed Assyrian records document battles and tribute involving Israelite kings like Ahab and Jehu, historians successfully synchronize the biblical timeline with absolute history. Working backward through the verified chronologies of the kings of Judah and Israel, historians confidently anchored the 4th year of King Solomon's reign to 966 BCE. With Solomon's 4th year established at 966 BC, we simply apply the 1 Kings 6:1 formula, adding 480 years lands us directly on 1446 BCE as the exact date of the Exodus. So 1446 BCE, which is part of the 15th century BCE. Okay. With the Exodus being in the 15th century BC, this means the event happened during the 18th dynasty of Egypt and not the 19th dynasty. Again, looking at the biblical narrative, right? Looking at what the Bible says, right? See, here's the issue, right? People trust what the Egyptians say wholesale. People trust what the Assyrians say wholesale. But when it comes to the Bible, there's all this skepticism. People record their history. And it is what it is, right? So again, according to what the Bible says about when the Exodus happened, Solomon began building the temple in the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, which is known as the Exodus. That puts it within the 15th century BC, and thus nullifying the 19th dynasty as the dynasty in which the Exodus took place. Okay. So sidebar, the dating of ancient Egypt's dynastic history is not set and completely agreed upon by scholars, right? Egyptian history, there's again, we have these different intermediate periods. There's a lot of speculation based off how they calculated time as well. So a lot of that brings in the confusion, and you have something known as high chronology, you have low chronology, right? So here are the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, right? Shout out to ChatGPT, was able to recreate these pharaohs based off of their busts, their mummies and things of that nature, right? So again, Amos the First, he is the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. He's the brother of Chamos, right, who fought against the Hyksos and he's the one who prevailed. Right. Next, you have Amenhotep the first, then Thutmose the first, then Thutmose the second, then Thutmose the third, then Hatshepsut, Amenhotep the second, Thutmose the fourth, Amenhotep the third, Akhenaten, aka Amenhotep the fourth. That was his original name. Right. Then you got, forget this guy's name. It's hard to pronounce. Then you got Nefertiti, Tut, I, and Horemheb. Right. So now, following the 1446 BC timeline aligns the Exodus narrative precisely with Egypt's most powerful royal house, the 18th dynasty. Hatshepsut flawlessly fits the profile of Pharaoh's daughter who drew Moses from the reeds of the Nile River. Now, sidebar, I've heard other theories that potentially Queen Amos, right? Queen Amos, who was the wife of Thutmose the first, right, and the daughter of Amos the first, that she might have been the one who is the daughter of Pharaoh that adopted Moses, right? Regardless, right? Again, Exodus happened in the 18th dynasty. Okay. Thutmose III, her co-regent and successor, aligns perfectly as the Pharaoh of the oppression from whom Moses fled into Midian. Right. So this is from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, and this is a timeline that they have for the New Kingdom, right, which starts with the 18th dynasty. Okay. And again, what I'll do is after this live, I'll put this presentation in a link in the description so brothers and sisters can download it, right? So you have the second intermediate period with the Hyksos, right? Then again, we see the reigns of these various pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, okay? So our historical candidates, we have Thutmose III, we have Amenhotep II. Thutmose III, more than likely, is the pharaoh of the oppression, the one in which Moses fled for. Now, he is the only pharaoh within the 18th dynasty that reigned for over 40 years. And again, according to Acts 7 and 30, Moses fled for 40 years. He fled from a pharaoh who wanted to kill him. That pharaoh had to have reigned for more than 40 years, or at least 40 years. And Thutmose III is the only pharaoh of the 18th dynasty that reigned for over 40 years, right? He also had extensive building projects, which aligns with the enslavement of the Israelites. Now, his son, Amenhotep II, this guy perfectly is positioned, right? His reign is in around 1446. This is the pharaoh that experienced the plagues, right? Amenhotep II is the pharaoh of the Exodus. So, reigning during the mid-15th century BC, Amenhotep II's timeline perfectly intersects with the biblical date of 1446 BC. Historical records paint him as a boastful, arrogant, and physically imposing ruler, a personality that closely matches the stubborn pharaoh predicted or depicted in Exodus. Despite being an aggressive warrior king early in his reign, his military campaigns abruptly ceased around 1446 BC, aligning with the devastating loss of the Egyptian chariot army at the Red Sea, right? So, based off of the timeline that the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology laid out, Amenhotep II would have came into power in 1450, right? That means that the Exodus happened within his 5th year of his reign, right? So let's move on. And actually, another side note, right? His father, Thutmose III, was a great warrior king as well, and he expanded the empire the most, right? He was stepping on shit, right? So his son, trying to follow up in his dad's stead, right? He's trying to be that guy, right? So now, there was an abrupt shift in his reign. So Amenhotep II led massive military campaigns early in his reign. After his 9th year, around 1446 BC, these campaigns inexplicably and permanently stopped, right? Here's the thing, what you got to understand is that these pharaohs, they love to boast about all of their exploits, right? They have this is again, power is something that has to be projected, right? And we look at what the scriptures say, that the Most High God, he showed his power through Pharaoh, right? So again, these pharaohs, they were boastful. They did a lot of popping it, right? They really did pop it, right? Interestingly enough, right? If you guys have been paying attention for quite some time, myself, as well as the brothers of Rongadol Gabarium, as well as the brother Eliel from Anointed House of Saints, we've been going into a lot of this history surrounding the Bronze Age, the Bronze Age collapse and the Sea Peoples, and how, again, the Israelites, mainly the tribes of Dan and Judah, right, were engaged in maritime trade, right? Now, you have this thing, you have this temple known as Medinet Habu, right? Medinet Habu, right? It was, who was it built by? I believe it was built by, what's his name? So going back to Medinet Habu, right? It's a temple, all right? It was originally built by A, right, who was the second to last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, right? And when you look at Medinet Habu, you have Ramses, right? The first pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, his name is Ramses the First, right? And within it, right, I'm just read this real quick. Where are we? All right, so it was an important New Kingdom period temple structure in the West Bank of Luxor in Egypt. Aside from its size and architectural and artistic importance, the mortuary temple is probably best known as the source of inscribed reliefs depicting the advent and defeat of the Sea Peoples during the reign of Ramses III, right, including the Battle of the Delta. Some of the building materials were reused from earlier monuments, including the destroyed mortuary temple of Tasseret, the last known ruler of the final pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, right? So when you look at Medinet Habu, one of the names of the Sea Peoples that were conquered were called the Danans, or the Danuna. That's the tribe of Dan, right? So again, this is 19th dynasty. There is no way that the Exodus happened within the 19th dynasty, right? History just does not support that. So again, Amenhotep II, again, his military campaigns halted early on in his reign. He reigned for about 25 years. The succession of military dominance strongly aligns with the biblical account of the Egyptian chariot army being completely destroyed in the Red Sea. Now, what you also got to understand as well is that horses were brought in to Egypt from Eurasia by the Hyksos, right? These chariots, the Hyksos are the ones who brought it in. And when the 18th dynasty conquered, right, of course they took over, right? They started breeding the horses and whatnot, right? So if Pharaoh's army is taken out, loss of chariots, these horses are drowned as well, right? Again, this lines up with Amenhotep's reign, right? So following this period, Egypt experienced a sudden decline in monumental building projects consistent with the loss of their massive Hebrew slave workforce, right? Now, in order to continue the empire, continue your rule, you need to replace these slaves, right? When you look at what happened here in America, the natives were enslaved, right? Many of them died because of all of the diseases that the Europeans brought with them. And when that happened, they started coming over to Africa and taking slaves from Africa, right? So you got to replace the slaves, right? So right around the time of the Exodus, Amenhotep II launched a desperate raid into Canaan, bringing back an unprecedented number of captives, over 100,000 recorded. This is from the Memphis Stele of Amenhotep II, which is from the 9th year of his reign. So this labor shortage and this massive influx of human capital indicates a sudden critical need to replace a massive slave labor force that had unexpectedly and abruptly vanished from Egypt. Right? We're talking about, I forget the number. Like in the Bible, it talks about hundreds of thousands of just men. That number doesn't include the women and the children. So you lose that population of slaves. Yeah, you gotta refill that pipeline, right? So he made that expedition into Canaan, right? And they say, again, we don't know if that number is true, because again, a lot of times these niggas be capping, right? But 100,000 were recorded of being brought back into the land of Egypt, right? These historical actions align perfectly with the catastrophic loss of the Israelite workforce, demonstrating Egypt's frantic attempt to recover its broken economy. So, this inexplicable and sudden military decline strongly supports the biblical account of Pharaoh losing his chariots, officers, and entire elite army in the Red Sea, leaving the nation severely weakened for decades. Okay, so let's see. So Justin Maddox asked a question about First Chronicles 7:21. Okay. So I think I know what you're talking about, right? Talking about the sons of Ephraim. Yes. So when you actually look at some earlier Jewish commentary on First Chronicles. I'm in First Chronicles tripping. Where are we? Watch this. First Chronicles chapter 7. And you asked about verses 21 to 22. I got you. So also verse 20, it says, and the sons of Ephraim, Shalawam, and Bered his son, and Tahath his son, and Eladah his son, and Tahath his son, and Zabad his son, and Shutela his son, and Ezer, and Eliad, whom the men of Gath that were born in that land slew, because they came down to take away their cattle. And Ephraim their father mourned many days, and his brethren came to comfort him, right? So I'm glad you actually mentioned that, right? So when you look at that and look at some of the Targums and some of some early so-called Jewish traditions concerning that, this is during the time of what we just talked about, right? So if you're in the camp that the Hyksos were ruling, Goshen, right? Lower or northern Egypt. We have these Ephraimites, these specific Ephraimites that go into the land of where the Philistines are, which is in the land of Canaan, right? And they try to take cattle from them. And the men of Gath, the Philistines, killed them, right? Again, when you look at that from Goshen into the land of Canaan, that's known as the Way of the Philistines. And again, this is all during the Bronze Age, where you had these different sea peoples, right? The Peliset, or the Philistines, were mentioned in Metahabel, right? They came from Caphtor, which is Crete, right? This is all the Aegean Mediterranean area. So there's a theory that the tribe of Ephraim, which is they're the chosen son of Joseph, they were charioteers. They're the ones who had the chariots, and they left to go into the land of Canaan early, and essentially left the rest of the tribes of Israel with no defense when Amos in the 18th dynasty, right, him and his army came and besieged Avaris. And that's another reason why they enslaved us, because again, if you got these chariot drivers, right? A chariot driver is like a Navy SEAL in the ancient world. And these niggas are going into the land of Canaan, right? It makes sense why this military leaders think, oh, they went here, they might again come back and try to, right, bring another army with them. So let's go back to Exodus chapter 11, right? Exodus 11 and verse 10 again. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Right. So very, very good point that you made, brother Justin. Right. Beautiful. So now, how could Amenhotep II be the Pharaoh of the Exodus if he didn't die in the Red Sea? And again, this is one of the reasons why certain individuals make the claim that Sentanke was somehow the Pharaoh of the Exodus because his mummy was never found, and he's known as the Pharaoh in the boat, right? Because the average person, when you read Exodus and read the account, we just think that that Pharaoh died, right? So Exodus chapter 14 and verse 21, it says, this is in the ESV, then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yahawah drove the sea back by the strong east wind and all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses. Now it says all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watch, Yahawah in the pillar of the fire of the cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian force into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for Yahawah fights for them against the Egyptians. Right? Verse 26. Then Yahawah said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, Yahawah threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. So let's slow down, right? So I just want to go back real quick, right? It says, right from the chariot, he looked down at the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels, right? So their wheels are getting stuck, so that they drove heavily, right? So it's hard for them to drive, right? It's hard for them to move. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for Yahawah fights for them against the Egyptians. Right now, what you also got to understand is that in the ancient world, especially with a polytheistic nation like the Egyptians, in a lot of the Near Eastern cultures, they understood that different nations had they believed in multiple gods, but they believed that their God fought for them, right? That, again, we talked about this before about the divine council, right? The Most High God created gods for these other nations, but he's the Most High God and he's in control, right? When we even look at the plagues of Egypt, these were celestial attacks on the gods of the Egyptians, with the Most High God Yahawah smiting the Nile River, making it red, right? The Egyptians worshiped the Nile River in a god called Hapi, right? So this was an indictment and essentially a celestial war of the Most High God Yahawah, our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, fighting against the gods of the Egyptians. Said, I will punish the gods of the Egyptians, right? So these people, they understood that, again, every nation has their gods, right? Even when we look in the book of 1 Samuel, right? We lost to the Philistines, and they took the Ark of the Covenant, and they put the Ark of the Covenant where? In the house of Dagon, their god. And what happened? Dagon was tipped over, right? The Most High God showing his power, showing that, one, these idols ain't nothing, right? The gods that you're actually worshiping, these my little niggas. I make them, right? They're called the sons of God for a reason, right? So put that into perspective, right? Let's go back here, Exodus chapter 14 and verse 27 says, so Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, right? So this is all when it's dark outside, right? And when they're coming against us. So now, and again, what was giving us light? That pillar of fire, right, was leading us. That chariot, that celestial chariot, that so-called UFO, right? It says, and as the Egyptians fled into the sea, Yahawah threw. We're gonna look at this word threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The water returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen of all the hosts, all the army or the hosts of Pharaoh that have followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and to their left. Thus Yahawah saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that Yahawah used against the Egyptians. So the people feared Yahawah, and they believed in Yahawah and his servant Moses, right? So now, Psalm chapter 136 and verse 13 to 15, it says, to him who divided the Red Sea in two, for his steadfast love endures forever, and made Israel pass through the midst of it. For his steadfast love endures forever, but overthrew Pharaoh and his hosts in the Red Sea, for his steadfast love endures forever, right? So again, this same word that's translated as overthrew here in Psalms is the same word that's translated here in Exodus 14 as through, right? It's the Hebrew word na'ir. And what does it mean? To shake out or off, to shake out, show emptiness, to be shaken, to shake oneself, to shake off or out, to shake oneself, right? That's the outline of biblical usage. Looking at the definition, it says through the idea of rustling a mane, right? A lion rustling his mane, which usually accompanies a lion's roar, to tumble about, shake off, overthrow, toss up and down. That word does not mean kill, right? Now, again, we saw in Exodus that the host of Pharaoh, his army, that we saw their dead bodies on the seashore, but it didn't say that Pharaoh went into the sea. It didn't say that. It said that he overthrew Pharaoh in his hosts, right? So again, the text does not explicitly state that the Pharaoh himself died in the Red Sea. It does not explicitly say that. So now we got to ask the question, does Amenhotep match the biblical criteria for the Exodus Pharaoh? So again, Moses fled from his predecessor for 40 years. So Moses spent 40 years in Midian waiting for the previous Pharaoh to die. Amenhotep's predecessor, Thutmose III, reigned for an incredible 54 years, fulfilling this requirement. So again, the predecessor of the Exodus Pharaoh must have ruled for 40 years plus. Now, the Exodus Pharaoh survived the 10th plague, which was the smiting of the firstborn of everything in Egypt, meaning he was not the firstborn himself. Amenhotep's older brother, Amenemhat, died years before taking the throne. And then, of course, the Pharaoh of Exodus lost his heir. The 10th plague claimed Pharaoh's firstborn son. Tellingly, Amenhotep II's successor, Thutmose IV, was a younger son and not the original heir apparent. So he meets all these criteria. So now let us meet Amenhotep's firstborn son. This is Prince Weben Senu. So his mummy was discovered in 1898 by Victor Loret in Amenhotep II's tomb, which is known as KV35. It contained his mummy alongside a mysterious unidentified adolescent boy. The young mummy prominently bears the royal side lock of youth, a hairstyle reserved exclusively for young princes. Evidence shows that he was buried in his father's tomb before his father's death. Here's Prince Weben Senu. Now let's meet Amenhotep's successor, Thutmose IV, right? He erected something known as the Dream Stele, okay? And it's between the paws of the Great Sphinx. In it, he claims the gods promised him the throne in a dream. Now, I wouldn't say that they didn't, right? Because again, the heathen have their own gods to worship. Yahawah is our God. right? The Most High God divided the nations according to the sons of God, which are the celestial beings, right? So-called angels, right? The sons of God. So such divine justification was highly unusual and completely unnecessary for a rightful firstborn heir. This artifact strongly implies that Amenhotep II's actual firstborn son died unexpectedly, paving the way for a younger son to rule, aligning perfectly with the 10th plague. Now let's ask if Ramses the Great matches the biblical criteria for the Exodus Pharaoh. Again, just based off of the timeline of what the Bible says, the Exodus happened in the middle of the 15th century BCE. Ramses the Great did not rule in the 15th century BCE. Okay? But other than that, right, his predecessor, who's Seti I, reigned for only 11 years, possibly 15, right? But most scholars say he reigned for 11 years, right? And his predecessor, who's Ramses I, right? So when we look at the 18th dynasty, it's known as the Thutmosid dynasty, right? Because you had 3 niggas named Thutmose. Actually, no, 4, if I'm not mistaken. Right? You have 4 Thutmoses, right? In the 18th dynasty. And then the 19th dynasty is known as the Ramessid dynasty, because the first guy who starts the dynasty, his name is Ramses I, and the greatest nigga, the greatest pharaoh of the 19th dynasty is Ramses the Great, right? So you got Ramses I, he only reigns for 2 years. And then you got Seti I, he reigns for 11 years. So that's 13 years, all right? He's 27 years shy of that biblical requirement. Now, again, looking at Ramses II, he was not the firstborn himself. Ramses II's older brother was his father's, Seti I's firstborn and crown prince. He died young, and his name is believed to be Nebkad-Setemneb, right? I don't know. Now, again, the Pharaoh of the Exodus, he lost an heir. The 10th plague claimed Pharaoh's firstborn son, Ramses II's successor, Merneptah, was a younger son and not originally heir apparent. His eldest son was named Amun-Her-Kefeset, and he died about 25 years into Ramses' reign. So he does meet these 2 requirements, right, of not being the firstborn himself and losing his firstborn heir. But again, his predecessor needs to reign for more than 40 years. And he didn't. He reigned for 11 years. Even if you look at his 2 predecessors, they reigned for a combined 13 years. And again, according to the biblical text, the Exodus happened within the 15th century BC, and he did not reign within that time frame. So Ramses II does not fit all of the biblical criteria, as his father and predecessor did not reign for at least 40 years. Furthermore, if we were to say Ramses II was the pharaoh of the oppression, right? So again, we said that Thutmose III is the pharaoh of the oppression, or the pharaoh in which Moses fled from. Let's say that Ramses II is that guy, right? Well, the issue is, right, that would make Merneptah the pharaoh of the Exodus. Well, we already looked at the Merneptah stele, and Israel is an established people in the land of Canaan during his 5th year of his reign. So that don't work, right? But even still, when we look at Merneptah's successor, Seti II, he was indeed the firstborn. So again, he would not have experienced that 10th plague. So it's clear that Ramses II is not the pharaoh of the Exodus. He's not the pharaoh of the oppression. And Merneptah is not the pharaoh of the Exodus based off of these criteria. Now, going back to Amenhotep II, there's physical evidence of the plague. So the biblical narrative describes a severe plague of festering boils breaking out on both man and beast throughout Egypt in Exodus chapter 9, verse 9. When researchers examined Amenhotep II's mummy, they noted unusual raised nodule lesions and bumps covering his skin. While medically debated as possible embalming artifacts, several biblical researchers propose these distinct tubercles are the physical remnants of the plague of boils leaving the pharaoh permanently scarred, right? And then just look at his mummy. I ain't never seen a mummy with those bumps, right? But that's on Amenhotep II. So now let's revisit Avaris. So again, there was when you look at the archaeological records, there was an abrupt abandonment of Avaris, right? Again, which was originally the capital of the Hyksos. And of course, the 18th dynasty, they took it over. Archaeological evidence shows the bustling Semitic settlement and palace at Avaris experienced a sudden massive population collapse, leaving houses and workshops behind. This abrupt abandonment occurred directly with the reign of Amenhotep II. This exact timing provides powerful archaeological corroboration for the early 1446 BC Exodus date. The intentional smashing of the colossal Joseph statue possibly occurred during this sudden departure, or after, or even prior to, right? This reflects the extreme political turmoil and anger of the Egyptians following the plagues. So now we're going to go back to the archaeological reports of Avaris, right? So we're looking here, this is figure 55, right? This is from 1995, this excavation. This is a plan of the citadel of the late Hyksos period in early 18th dynasty at Esbet Helmi Tel El Daba, right? That is this a sketch of that site, that archaeological site, okay? So now, looking at this figure, this is figure 56, is a platform of a palatial fortress, which is known as H/I, of the early 18th dynasty, with remains of gardens on the eastern edge, right? So if you take a look here, here will be the gardens. This is the palatial structure or fortress. So now, looking here, we have figures 57 and then figure 58. Figure 57, all right, again, platform HI, or the palatial fortress, with settlement remains of the first half of the 18th dynasty. Clusters show a major dumps of Minoan frescoes, right? The Minoans, they lived in Cyprus, and if I'm not mistaken, also Crete, right? Cyprus is right off the coast of Israel / Goshen, this area. So again, there was all this maritime trade happening at this time, right? So again, fits the time period. Again, this is just a reconstruction. Salakia, this is a reconstruction. Yeah, give me a second. This is a reconstruction of the palatial platform of the early 18th dynasty, with secondary setting of the doorway of Amenhotep I from this site, right? So let's just read. This is from page what page more? This is from page 72 of this report. Okay, and I'm just going to read from the second paragraph. It says, to the east of the platform HI, there was a middle-class settlement which seems to have incorporated workshops. It reveals this distinct stratigraphy. The houses were constantly changed and renewed. The house type of this settlement conforms to the well-known New Kingdom style or type of architecture. Within the settlement, numerous scarabs have been found, among them a series of royal scarabs. Their relative position is consistent with the succession of the named pharaohs and covers the time from Amos to Amenhotep II. I have mentioned above that the walls of this settlement run against the ramp of platform HI and cover at least some of the wall plaster fragments bearing Minoan frescoes. As it seems more persuasive now to date platforms HI and the frescoes to the beginning of the 18th dynasty and no longer to the Hyksos period. The beginning of this settlement should date to after Amos. Because of recent agricultural leveling, we do not know if the settlement continued beyond the time of Amenhotep II. So again, looking at this this report, it seems that this palace wasn't used after Amenhotep II. I wonder why, right? So now, right, again, still on page 72, it reads, New excavations in 1995 have revealed to the west of the platform HI a part of a huge compound, which is known as HV, which is without doubt another royal building project of the first half of the 18th dynasty. Long, narrow corridor-like rooms and enormous walls suggest a tract of magazines with at least one story. They may belong to a temple, which still awaits excavation. In the corridors were dumps of faience objects, among them figurines, as well as lots of broken pottery, particularly late Cypriot means Cyprus, imports. It is premature to attempt to say when exactly this complex was constructed. It could have been built when the platform HI was in use during Amos's reign, or soon afterwards. The collected pottery from the corridor debris would suggest the middle of the 18th dynasty as the terminus antiquum for the end of its functioning. This would conform roughly with the latest date of the middle class settlement east of the platform. So again, terminus antiquorum, right? Let's just look at this term real quick, right? Terminus antiquum. Terminus antiquum is a Latin phrase literally meaning the limit before which. In history and archaeology, it refers to the latest possible date an event could have occurred for the most recent possible time an object was created, right? So again, this archaeological evidence shows that this palatial structure stopped being in use around the time of who? Amenhotep II. So now, Exodus 14:7, he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them, right? So there's evidence of a great chariotry that was found in excavations at Kantir, which is ancient Pi Ramses, by archaeologist Edgar P. Pusch, uncovered a massive military complex known as Area QIV or Q4. The site contained an enormous royal horse stud and chariot garrison capable of housing and training an estimated 500 horses, right? Again, the Bible says 600. They're estimating 500. This unprecedented find represents the largest chariot garrison ever discovered from the ancient world. The sheer scale of this garrison corroborates the biblical account of Egypt possessing a massive, highly organized chariot army. In an adjacent exercise courtyard, archaeologists discovered 3,000-year-old horse hoof prints preserved in the mud, frozen in time after being covered with a layer of sand. Attached to the garrison was a high-tech bronze foundry, right? Foundries where they forge things, right? Forge bronze. Excavators found hubcaps, linchpins, horse bits, and weapons being mass-produced on an assembly line. These monumental findings were extensively published by Edgar P. Pusch, included in the Encyclopedia of Archaeology of Ancient Egypt from 1999 and various Kantir Pi Ramses project volumes. Okay, so with the biblical date of the Exodus established in 1446 BC, the beginning of the conquest of the land of Canaan would have began around 1406 BC, accounting for the Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, right? Now we're moving on to other evidence. Now we have the Amarna letters. Amarna was an area, like something known as the Amarna period within the 18th dynasty, and this is during the reigns of Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV, aka Akhenaten, right? So in the Amarna letters, we see the Canaanites pleading to Pharaoh, right, for help, for military help, right? So now, again, going back to proving that the Exodus did not happen in the 19th dynasty, right? Let's take a look at this, right? So, scholars suggest the Exodus occurred late during the 19th dynasty under Ramses II. However, this creates a major chronological conflict, as the Amarna letters would predate the Exodus by over a century, rendering them irrelevant to the Israelite conquest of Canaan, right? And here's the thing. Why would these Canaanites be begging Pharaoh for help for these, what they call Habirus, right? We'll touch on that word in a bit. These Habirus that are taking over. Who would have been taking over the land of Canaan before the Israelites? I would love to know, right? Again, the Amarna letters predate the 19th dynasty. The letters were actually written during the 18th dynasty under Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, following the reign of Amenhotep II. This perfectly matches the early 1446 Exodus date, placing the letters exactly at the time of Joshua's conquest. So these were discovered at Tel El Armana, right, which was Akhenaten's capital. These 14th century BC clay tablets are urgent diplomatic pleas from Canaanite mayors to the Egyptian pharaoh. The letters, now again, why are these Canaanites being considered mayors or subjects to Egypt? Well, we demonstrated how in the 9th year of Amenhotep II's reign, he led a campaign into Canaan and took 100,000 captives. But before that, his father, Thutmose III, expanded the borders, right, in the reach of the Egyptian empire, right, which would include Canaan. So, again, this all lines up. It says the letters describe widespread panic as a nomadic people, identified as the Habiru or the Hapiru, depending on how the linguist renders it, right? Habiru sounds a lot like Ha-Ibaria or Ha-Ivri or Ibri, however you want to pronounce it. It's the same shit, the Hebrews. Systematically invaded and took over Canaanite territories. Many scholars draw a strong historical and etymological connection between the Habiru and the Hebrews, aligning with the entering Canaan under Joshua. So local leaders and or mayors of Canaanite city-states under Egyptian control wrote to the pharaoh. These letters are highly deferential, referring to the pharaoh as my lord and the son. Vassals routinely requested Egyptian military support to defend against local threats or rival city-states. So now, this is Armana letter EA 289, right? It's from Abdi Heba, the king of Jerusalem. And this is what he says. Are we to act like Labayu when he was giving the land of Shechem to the Habiru? Right? Then he's begging for help. Right? Are we to be like this guy? Are we to be like this guy who just gave up his territory to these Habirus? So, according to this letter, Labayu, the Canaanite ruler of Shechem, was accused by neighboring kings of treason for voluntarily handing over his territory to the invading Habiru without a fight. In Joshua 8, the Israelites traveled deep into hostile territory to Shechem for a covenant ceremony. Curiously, there is no biblical record of a battle for Shechem, yet Israel had full control of it. Now, and when we look at Shechem, right? Now let's tie this back to the rest of the biblical narrative. Let me know, family, if y'all know the significance of Shechem in the book of Genesis. Anyone? What's the significance of Shechem? Before Joshua, before Exodus, what's the significance of Shechem? Yes, it's a place. What's the significance of that place? There's a story surrounding that place. Yes, also a man. What happened with that man in that place? Anyone? I'll tell you. Dinah got popped by Shechem right? Again, the city called Shechem. There was an arrangement. Pop said, "All right, we'll give her to your son to marry, right? You and all your men got to get circumcised." And what happened? What happened? Simeon and Levi slid on them niggas and killed them all. So here we are years later. Them same people, the descendants of them same people, rolling back into town. They said, "Listen, we don't want no smoke with these niggas." Not Judah. It wasn't Judah. It was Simeon and Levi, right? Listen, them niggas ain't want no smoke with us when we came rolling through. That's why. I would say that's why they said, "Fuck it here. Y'all can have it." Right? They knew what time it was, right? So both archaeological and the archaeological record and biblical narrative align perfectly. Shechem was not violently conquered by the Israelites, but was peacefully relinquished to them by its rulers. Now, in the book of Joshua, chapter 8, again, as previously stated, it says in verse 30, and then we skip to verse 33, it says, "At that time, Joshua built an altar to Yahawah, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal." Right here on the right, Mount Ebal. To the left, we have Mount Gerizim. Right, there was just some archaeological findings at Mount Gerizim. Right, they found these curse tablets there. Right, so again, archaeology is always proving the biblical narrative. History has always been my favorite subject, right? And of course, the Bible has always been a passion of mine. Melding the two together is amazing. I love it, right? And again, archaeology confirms the Bible. Funny enough, when I was a kid, when I was growing up, two of the careers that I wanted to embark on when I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect early on, and I also wanted to be an archaeologist, right? Those were my passions when I was young, right? So jumping down back here in Joshua chapter 8, verse 33, it says, "And all Israel sojourned as well as native born, and their elders and the officers and their judges stood on the opposite sides of the ark before the Levitical priests, who carried the ark of the covenant of Yahawah, half of them in the front of Mount Gerizim, and the half of them in the front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of Yahawah, had commanded at the first to bless the people of Israel." Right. So again, we right there. You got Mount Ebal right here to the right, Mount Gerizim right here to the left, and Shechem's right there in between. That's Shechem. So here's the final nail in the coffin for the Exodus occurring in the 18th dynasty and not the 19th dynasty. Meet Manetho, right? I mentioned him earlier, right? He was a priest, a native Egyptian priest during the Hellenistic period, under the Ptolemaic dynasty, right? So Manetho was a native Egyptian historian and Serapis cult priest who lived around Avaris during the early 3rd century BC, which is the Ptolemaic dynasty. He compiled a comprehensive history of Egypt called the Egyptica. Egyptica is what? It's a Greek term, right? Again, Hellenism. The Egyptians were Hellenized. The Israelites were Hellenized, right? Hellenism spread to Persia, right? You have this place called Persepolis, right? It's called Persepolis because it means the city of the Persians, right? Again, the Greeks had influence on these different cultures that they conquered, right? So it says he compiled a comprehensive history of Egypt called the Egyptica, which survives today only in fragments cited by later historians such as Josephus. Manetho's account is the earliest known extra-biblical reference to directly name the Exodus Pharaoh. He explicitly identifies the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus as Amenophis, the Greek variant of the name Amenhotep. Now we have 4 pharaohs, really 3 pharaohs within the 18th dynasty named Amenophis or Amenhotep. You got Amenhotep the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and again, Amenhotep the 4th is Akhenaten. He changed his name to Akhenaten, right? So this is Josephus's exact quotation. It was also reported that the priests, and he's quoting Manetho, it is also reported that the priests who ordained their polity and their laws, the Torah, was by birth of Heliopolis or Pithom. Interesting. Isn't that one of the cities that the Israelites built for Pharaoh? Oh yeah. And his name Osarsif, but that when he was gone over to these people, his name was changed and he was called Moses. After this, Amenephis returned back with a great army and joined battle with the shepherds and the polluted people. So they're calling us a polluted people because all the stuff that our God did to them, right? And we're being known as what? Shepherds. It's another reason why, right? We're more than likely the Hyksos. The Israelites are the Hyksos, right? Ruling Upper Egypt. There's that resentment of the native people, right? Of these foreign occupiers, right? Just how the Native Americans today have resentment for the white man, right? The same way we as Blacks and Hispanics, we've been conquered and subjugated by the Edomites here in Babylon, right? There's of course that resentment, right, because of what they've done to us. It's the same thing as being outlined here, but he names this Pharaoh that comes against them as Amenephis, which is Amenhotep, the only Pharaoh within the 18th dynasty that fits the bill is Amenhotep II. There ain't no Amenhoteps in the 19th dynasty. And if I'm not mistaken, there ain't no Amenhoteps in the 20th dynasty, as some niggas try to claim the fact the Exodus happened in. Right? So, it's clear, right? Amenhotep II is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. So now let's look at the summary of the evidence. We got 12, in Avaris, we got 12 tombs with missing bones. There's a colossal statue of an Asiatic leader, which aligns with Joseph. The abrupt abandonment of the settlement directly corroborates the Israelites' presence in sudden exodus, right? The chronological alignment, 1 Kings 6:1 places the exodus at 1446 BC, directly during the reign of Amenhotep II. The physical and historical anomalies. Amenhotep II's mummy exhibits boil-like lesions, which was a symptom of the 6th plague, and his firstborn son mysteriously died, which is the 10th plague. Right, again, he has that missing ear. Amenhotep II's firstborn son, he died, forcing his younger son, Thutmose IV, to justify his kingship with the dream stele. Then we have the chariot forces. Excavations at Kontir prove the existence of an unprecedented, massive royal chariot garrison in Goshen. Right, looking at the geopolitical shifts, Egypt's massive military campaigns are abruptly halted, pointing to the destruction of their chariot army. The Amarna letters confirm a Habiru invasion in Canaan, and the 18th dynasty lacks the lack of response attests to its power being overthrown. All right. The 3rd century BC Egyptian historian explicitly names the Exodus Pharaoh as Amenephis or Amenhotep, standing as the earliest extra-biblical confirmation. So again, there it is, family. Amenhotep II, he is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, all right? So, all right, so Justin, I see you have some questions. So can you incorporate the Battle of Kadesh and who were the people that deceived Pharaoh and what is this time period? All right, so let's take off. I didn't of course bring that into the presentation. Battle of Kadesh. So this is during the reign of Ramses II, right? So this battle happened between Ramses II and Muwatalli II of the Hittite Empire, right? So what you got to understand, right? We had Hittites that lived in the land of Canaan, right? That we were told to conquer in the Torah, but you also have something known as Hatti or Hattusa in modern day Turkey, right? That was the Hittite Empire. So this is well after we're in the land, Okay. And based off what we would have entered the land around 1406 BC, and given the timeline that was provided from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, right, that conquest would have happened during the reign of Amenhotep III, right? So again, Amenhotep II, he comes into power 1450. Exodus happens in 1446. He leaves again. He ain't got no labor force, so he goes into Canaan. All right, probably around like 1442. Takes 100,000 slaves, bring them back. Right, his reign rule ends in 1426. His son Thutmose IV, he comes into power. Right, 1426. That's 1425. Right, he reigns for, if I'm not mistaken, 9 years. And then his son Amenhotep III comes into power around 1416 BC, right? And that means that we would have entered into the land of Canaan and started conquering around 1406 BC. So that's within like the first 11, 12 years of his reign, right? So that's, again, in-team dynasty, right? And then after Amenhotep III, you have a plethora of other pharaohs, right? So again, you got, after Amenhotep III, right, you got Akhenaten. He reigns for 17 years, right? Amenhotep III himself reigns for 38 years. Okay. Akhenaten reigns for 17 years. Then he has a successor named Smekhare. He reigns for about 1 to 2 years. Nefertiti reigns for about 3 years as like a co-regent / queen, holding the title of pharaoh before Tutankhamun can come into power. He reigned for about 3 years. Then you got he reigns for 4 years. And then you got Horemheb. He reigns for 27 years. Now, Horemheb, if I'm not mistaken, he usurped I, right? So he's the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. And then you got Ramses the First. Then you got, was it Seti the First? And then you got Ramses the Third, right? So the Battle of Kadesh is well after the children of Israel have been in the land of Canaan, or now the land of Israel. Let's see. So yeah. It says, why would the Israelites be split on different mountains? I don't know. That's what the text says. So yeah, family. Justin, you saying that you want to come on and ask me some questions? Is that what you're asking? So what you're asking, brother? Are you asking to come on? Me put a link in the chat so you to come and ask questions. Justin Madison, are you still in the chat? Do you still have a question, brother? Can put a link in the chat, right? So, real quick, right? Want to note that here on the channel, you can now actually become a member of the channel. Actually, let me switch accounts real quick. Let me switch accounts. How's it not popping up? Let me see. Let me see something real quick. Brother Justin, your questions are unintelligible, right? Not unintelligent, they're unintelligible. I don't understand what you're asking. Okay? I don't understand what you're actually asking me. Let me see something. Oh, I didn't. Okay, gotcha. So now refresh. Here we go. If I got any questions, go ahead and ask your questions. Okay. Yeah, I'll put the link for the presentation in the description once this is over. But real quick, family. So recently I uploaded this video right here. This was a debate that I had on Clubhouse with this brother Zadok. He is, I believe, he used to be a Christian rapper. He believes that he's an Israelite, but again, he's a Hebrew Christianite, right? He's like he's just like right, Hebrew Christianite, right? I debated this guy a couple of years ago, and of course, as many of you guys know, my channel was clipped last year, and of course, all that content was lost. The other day, someone had asked about how to get access to my old content, right? So what I did was I created a membership here on the channel, right? Used to have a membership on the old channel. I just haven't done one now, right? But now, if you go here to my page, you can go to membership, and you can join to get access to member-only lives, early access to new videos, of course, member shout-outs, member-only live chats as well. Might be bringing some other things to it as well. I'm only doing one tier, right? Not doing multiple tiers. But again, if you want to have access to a lot of my older content from my days when I was in Sakari, right, you'll be able to access that through the membership, right? I don't want anything Sakari being just like blasted and advertised on this channel, right? We are House of Bread, right? So, but I understand that brothers and sisters still want access to that stuff. So again, you'll be able to get access to that via the membership, right? So become a member, right? Again, make sure you like, share, make sure you hit that bell icon. Additionally, if it's on your heart, you can super chat, leave a super thanks. You can donate via Cash App or PayPal to @House of Bread. So PayPal @House of Bread, Cash App again $ House of Bread 144. So you can do that as well. Family Baba Kusha. What else we got going on? And yeah, make sure y'all are tapped in. Now again, next week, right? We will be diving into Moses in the Egyptian record, right? Moses in the Egyptian record. Who could he have been, right? So, this is actually going to be a shorter lesson. I'm not doing a full presentation like this one, but what we're going to do is we're going to read a couple of articles, because there's some cases that can be made for two different individuals, right? He can fit one or two individuals. Any good sources on the Hyksos, right? In the presentation, I showed the archaeological evidence that's if you look that up, the Avaris. Actually, let me pull this back up. All right, so if you go to this, right, you just look this up. Avaris, the capital of the Hyksos, right, and type in Manfred Tech. If you type that in on Google, you'll be able to find the PDF. I got the PDF. Other than that, I'm not too sure on many sources on the Hyksos. Okay. But yeah, make sure. Any other questions? Let's see. All praise to the Most High, brother Neff. Appreciate you, King. Any other questions, family? But yeah, make sure that you guys tap in next week for this lesson, man. Just look at that artwork, man. That's fire. If I do say so myself, right? So we're gonna obviously Moses, he had two lives, right? He lived as an Egyptian, right? And of course he was chosen by the Most High God to deliver the children of Israel from who essentially grew up as his family, right? He would have been trained in the ways of Egypt, right? When you read the book of Joshua, it says that our forefathers worshiped the gods of Egypt in the land of Egypt, right? On the other side of, it says the flood in the KJV, but it's a body of water, right? So the Most High, and again, this is, when we look at these stories of these different patriarchs, these different biblical figures, right? Many of them are just like us, right? Right now, we're in Egypt, right? If you were a member of Christianity, you worshiped a different God than the God of the Bible, than the God of Israel. Because in Christianity, it teaches you that God is this Megatron, right? You got three entities that somehow equal one, right? Nonsense, right? If you were a member of Christianity, you did not worship the God of the Bible. Do not worship the God of the Israelites, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Some of our people were in Islam, right? Allah is not the God of the Bible. They're completely different, right? So that was the same for our people in the land of Egypt. Here we are in modern day Egypt, right? And the Most High God redeemed them and delivered them. Lord willing, he'll be redeeming us very, very soon. All praise to the Most High, Brother Jehu. All right, family. But with that, what I want to do is give all praises, all glory, and all honor to the Most High God, whose name is Yahawah. Of course, I do so in the name of his only begotten Son, Hamashiach Yahawashi, who the world inwardly calls Jesus Christ. Until next time, Shalawam and Matawathya.